Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get yourself a nice 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are looking at Baby Blacephalon. It's the archetype that won the Juniors division of the Aichi tournament, and it's got a lot of people talking. Obviously, there's a big Lucky Egg tool card that can come into this deck. Most people think that Baby Blounds is really awesome in terms of its damage output, but they also know that it can certainly fizzle when they get, suffering knockouts in addition to reset stamps and such. So if, in theory, Lucky Egg can defend you against that late game awkwardness, maybe this just becomes the best sort of non-GX attacking deck that we have available. And it can just be more consistent in that late game, which is really the only flaw that this deck has. So that is the basic concept. Baby Blacephalon, pretty much the best single prize attacker that we have in terms of reaching ridiculous numbers and uptrading against tag teams and even VMAX Pokemon. Honestly, it can just do the works, really. Just being able to use those Fiery Flints and Fire Crystals can get a silly amount of fires in your hand and you just blow things up in the active, which is crazy. Sometimes you only really need to attack like 2 or 3 times, or like twice with the Baby Blacephalon and then once with the Blacephalon GX, and the game is over. So you can suffer some early knockouts, you can build up a board. When you're ready, just attack, win, basically. That's how Baby Blacephalon can sometimes just close out games. It really can be that simple. And as I said, having Lucky Egg now to defend against this deck's previous big weakness is really tempting. Onto the Pokemon, and it's a little bit unconventional. Some of you may have already seen the Japanese 60 from that Juniors division, and I've added a few different bits in here, but we are going with 4 copies of Jirachi. Stellar Wish is a really nice card to have access to early. We are quite vulnerable in those early turns. We have about 30 or so cards that we don't like using in the early stages, cards that are just dedicated to energy, that are obviously good like in the mid to late game and such, and are necessary for our damage output. That's the nature of this archetype. But about half of the deck, let's say, are cards that don't help you in those early stages. So I feel like it's really important that the other half of those cards are all consistency cards. I really do think that's important. So maxing out our Jirachi just to give ourselves better access to Welder, access to Quick Ball, access to Ultra Space. These are cards that are really important in those opening turns, just so that we don't literally just lose the game. I had some matches with the list that was played by the Juniors winner, and I just kept getting donked and losing and not really doing much and never actually getting a good board state, and just not having a fun time with the archetype. Yes, there were games where you just get the Fireball Circus early and it's all swimming because all those fires hit the discard pile and then all your fire crystals are alive and everything becomes peachy. But there are those early 1 or 2 turns where things can be really shaky. So having the maximum count of Stellar Wish and also having Zacian and Oricorio, which I'll get to in a minute, should, in theory, make that a little bit better. Those Blacephalon are our main attackers here. Blazer can do some early prods, sometimes those 10s and 20s and stuff can be a nice little prod to put things in range, especially if you happen to have a Fire Energy in your prize card. We play 14, so there are decent outs of that being the case. And obviously you can scout through your deck beforehand in some certain circumstances to see how likely you are to actually be able to get to Blazer. Usually this is just something that you end up using because there's nothing else to do. But Fireball Circus is the main selling point here. You can discard any number of fire from your hand and do 50 for each you discarded. Obviously that gets insane when we have the synergies of Fiery Flint in the initial stages and then Fire Crystal plus Energy Energy Retrieval to get those back. So yeah, really, really awesome stuff. And you just hit the amount to reach the knockout and you move on to the next attack, basically. We have Blacephalon GX that offers a great GX attack. Burst discards one of your prize cards, and then if it's a fire, you can attach it to one of your guys. But this is oftentimes a late game finisher against a lot of things, especially some 3-prize decks. You can take a 3-prize knockout a Dene, and then just Burst can be the way to win. That can sometimes be just the easy path for us to win. Bursting Burn can be a panic option, just to confuse things and force your opponent to have more outs. And Mind Blown is an alternate option if your opponent happens to be gusting around your Baby Blacephalon for whatever reason. Maybe they're gusting it to take more prize cards on the Oricorio or the Zacian, or just because there's a lucky egg on your Blacephalon, and you can keep those 3 energies that would be on your Blacephalon for Fireball Circus. Then you can do like another Welder play, and suddenly Mind Blown can be the means of reaching a knockout, so something that you shouldn't sleep on. 1 copy of Victini Prism. Infinity can become a very good late game style attack. We have 14, so not quite as many as the Ability-Zard based decks, but we can easily filter those energies out of our deck with the 4 copies of Fiery Flint that we play. So naturally, the energies hit the bin quite frequently with the 3 cost on the Baby Blacephalon, as well as the energies that just get thrown away from our hand to power up the damage. So you'll use this a decent amount just to, again, be an option to go through some regular GXs a lot of the time. It's not really getting through tag teams or anything in this build, but it can still take a handy 2 prizes along the way, or it can be used in non-GX v non-GX matchups quite handily, and gets enough energies back so we don't run out of fuel later on in the game. We have 1 copy of Mew for Bench Barrier. I think it's really important when you're playing Oricorio GX that you don't give Pikarom those easy 2 prizes, you don't give Mewtwo those easy 2 prizes just off sniping, and if people are playing Cramorant as well, you don't want to give them that freedom. Also, similar to Blazer, you can try and just use Psi Power in those early turns to put things like 1 energy closer to being knocked out for the Fireball Circus later on. So if you just happen to start with a Mew, you can just go ahead and attach and start Psi Powering to set things up if you want to as well. We have 1 copy of Phione for Whirlpool Suction. I think it's a good thing where you can just push something out of the way if you can't deal with it. It can be good against dolls as well, of course. So this can be a really handy ability. I only play 1 Great Catcher in the list because I'm so paranoid about early game brick that this is our main backup of moving stuff out of the way. That Oricorio GX has the Dance of Tribute ability. We haven't really seen this come into play much in Standard just yet, but it was utilized in the Japanese winning list, and I am a pretty big advocate of it. It's like having a lucky egg, but on your bench, basically. When you suffer a knockout at any point, you can just draw 3 cards during your turn. So, yeah, that's a pretty nice way to get us back into more Welders, more Fires, more Fire Crystals, you know, all that good stuff. That's going to be a nice card to have throughout the game. Surprisingly, it's good even on like turn 2 and stuff, just because everything's so squishy, stuff gets knocked out. You can then just bench the Oricorio and Dance of Tribute. You don't need to have it in play previously. It just says that during your last turn, it sort of meets the condition to be able to use this to draw 3, which is awesome. Also, being able to draw 3 is Zacian V. This guy is usable on your first turn, which is excellent. It just gives you that little bit of extra leeway with Quick Ball. Sometimes just getting a Blacephalon on the board doesn't really do much if your hand is nowhere near close to the likes of Welders or anything else to really get rolling. So just Quick Balling a Blown and then passing it to your opponent doesn't sound great. Instead, just going for that Zacian to get yourself another 3 cards can be good. This deck is able to pass a couple of turns because you know you have such great sort of springboard potential with damage later on that it feels like you can just sit there, Stellar Wish, Intrepid Sword passing a good few times until you're ready to start sending out the fireballs, which is pretty sweet. So yeah, I think Zacian is low-key a decent card. I prefer this to having Dedenne because I'm really against having too much discard in the deck. We already have Fiery Flints, we already have Quick Balls. That's plenty of discard here because having things like random Dedenne, you can just get rid of, you know, excess. Well, not even excess, just things like Fire Crystal, things like Energy Retrieval, some of these tech Pokemon and stuff that you don't necessarily want to put down straight away. That can all just be thrown away with Dedenne, and I'm not really a huge fan of that. So instead, I'm having the slightly tankier, slightly less easy to gust up Zacian that also doesn't have discard. So that's why I've made that choice over the Dedenne. Onto the trainers now. Again, a few different tweaks from the list we saw in Aichi, but still the solid core. We're playing a Pal Pad to reload Welders. Obviously great for, again, like late game reset stamps. It's not that you often need more than 4 Welders in a game. It's just that you want to access those Welders as quickly as possible. 1 great catcher, as I mentioned, for trying to pick things up. There's a lot of tag teams still in the meta from what I'm expecting, so you can quite happily hit through the active a decent amount. But the Great Catcher still is a nice option here for us to pick up 2 prize cards, which then opens us up for the Burst GX. One, Stadium Nav. I'm preferring this to a 4th copy of Ultra Space for obvious reasons. It can also grab us a Heat Factory. So it's like having a 2nd copy of that Stadium, and obviously we know Heat Factory is crazy, crazy good, and I've already said that I'm absolutely paranoid of just early game getting wrecked, and I don't want that to be the case, so I've got a really high space count, and I've also got that Stadium Nav to give us more options off of Stellar Wish and such to get ourselves that busted Heat Factory as well. 2 copies of Switch and 2 board to accommodate the Jirachi package. Oftentimes you'll sit there Stellar Wish passing, just building up the hand a lot of the time and letting our opponent do what they want, but these switches and boards let us go a bit more aggressive, which is great. 3 Retrieval, 4 Crystal, and 4 Flint. This is what I'm talking about when I'm saying a large majority of the deck is not live early on in the turns. Obviously, Flint is incredible to see early on. That's why you play 4 copies. But these Fire Crystals and Retrievals become trump cards once you've taken your first big tag team knockout. They become the ways that you close the game. But in the opening turns, they're just completely dead. So something to bear in mind. A couple copies of Lucky Egg. I initially was thinking of having 3 or 4 of this. But again, I go back to that redundancy effect where you look at your opening hand, and there's no point attaching a Lucky Egg if you're just going to get knocked out in the active with your only basic. So you may as well just play a couple copies, because it's only really great in that mid to late game once you've already taken 3 prize cards, so that you're protected from reset stamp more than anything. And then we have those 4 quick balls. It can access Zacian, it can access Jirachi, it can obviously get us our Blounds and stuff as well, so something to bear in mind. The Heat Factory in the Spaces, I've already mentioned. Space is really good for also getting our Blacephalon GX. It can be a really easy way that we can just sit with game on board, essentially, where you can just space out the GX, attach a fire, and go in and burst for the game. So it's good early just to get our attackers. Of course, you never really want to Welder onto anything that isn't a Blacephalon, like the Baby Blacephalon. So you always want to have access to these straight away so that you're not wasting a Welder on something like a Jirachi that then has to start Stellar Wishing to find your next Welder for the Blacephalon. So just guaranteeing that early Blacephalon makes your Welders much more live in those early turns, and Welder is still the main focus of this deck. So I've got a very, very high Pokemon count physically, but also a high count of the search as well, because I feel like flooding the board of basics gives you just a lot more leeway, knowing that you're not just going to lose instantly. Because you've got 1 Jirachi and 1 Blacephalon in play. Jirachi gets knocked out, you have to promote your Blound that you've welded onto, but your hand's not ready to take big knockouts, and you just kind of fizzle from there. You end up having to pay retreat and do all this other awkward stuff. So having more Baby Blacephalons that you can just sort of throw into the line of fire is never a bad thing either. Just something that I've noticed early on playing this sort of archetype. Onto the supporters, pretty simple. Welders is a good card. We're going to try and use 4 of them. It obviously helps us access our Fireball Circus and Victini and all that good stuff. You know what Welders is all about at this point. Onto the energy, we're playing 14 Fire. It's a really high count that we can try and Flint, have plenty of resources left for the Fireball Circus. It enables that Victini. You know what the deck's all about. You want to have a bunch of fire energies. These are also great cards to see in those opening turns. We have a few, I've tried quite a bit in this list to have a lot of redundancy as I go onto the full list here. You'll see, I've got that Stadium Nav and the 3 Ultra Space. It's a really high count. I'm fully aware of that, but I love having that sort of redundancy factor in the list, knowing that you have more than you need, because you do have discard in the deck. You have Fiery Flint, you have Quick Ball. These are cards you need to play throughout the game. So having live cards in your hand that you can just pitch off at any moment is also great for you. So cards like even the Zacian and stuff, if you just see him in the mid game, you know he's trash. You're never going to put him down. But he can be a perfect target for quick balls and flints and such, which is excellent for you. So I think that's something that was really missing from the list we saw from the juniors list. He was playing Acrobikes, and I think Acrobike was really even more painful in his 60 because he didn't have much redundancy. He just had the low count of Ultra Space and was relying on Acrobike. But Acrobike can be really painful on resources. You can just end up losing a Flint too many or a Crystal or whatever, and you can even lose Pokemon in the process. So I am really against Acrobike. I'm instead going for this redundancy effect so that you can only be discarding the things that you don't really need and making sure that you have enough Pokemon in the early turns just to play the game, which is my main focus on this list. For tech options, I have thought of a lot of things, and I have tried this out a couple of times. So I've had a few different variations going on in here. There are a couple other nice V attackers. Seeing as though I'm not a Puritan single prize list right now, we've got the Zacian, we've got the Oricorio, and Blacephalon GX basically only ever comes into play to finish the game, but if you just happen to start him, you do have a number of cards that can give up 2 prize kills, so why not have something like a Cramorant? Again, we only have one great catcher right now, so and that Phione, so that Spit Shoot could be a great way to close games. It can also use that Beat Catch attack, which is low-key pretty clutch as well, so that could also be an option for you. I think if I played the Cramorant V, I would try and look to get a higher switching count, so that you can send him into the active early and just start going for that Beat Catch to actually just get some key pieces rolling. So I think he's a decent option just because he's great late and he's great early, so that's pretty sweet. And Victini V, he's also pretty cool. He can get some fire energies from the discard onto your Pokemon, so whilst you're whiffing Welders, you can at least use Spreading Flames. And Energy Burst is a pretty low maintenance attack, just doing 30 for each energy attached to both active Pokemon. It doesn't really ever reach huge knockouts on a lot of things, like tag team stuff or anything, but it can still quite handily deal with like Zacians and stuff like that, so that's also something to bear in mind. For different items that I've thought of, like I said, I'm not a fan of Acrobike, but it was, I believe it was a 4 of in the winning 60, so I wouldn't hate it if you guys wanted to choose to play it. It might also mean that you want to play a normal rod in the 60. It gives you a bit more leeway with your Acrobikes at the very least. Normal rod, or I think it's called ordinary rod, the translation. Ordinary rod could also just be good in this list. Right now, I think I've got enough attackers in the 60. We've got the 4 Blowns, the 1 Victini, the 1 big Blacephalon and such. So I think we should be okay. But if you have some awkward discards early on, if you're just sacking prizes here and there, that could be a little bit rough. So potentially a normal rod could sneak in to be a little bit safer. You might want to play it just over one of your retrievals, perhaps. Island Challenge Amulet can protect your Oricorio GX from giving up 2 prizes. It means it can sit on the board a lot more freely, but it's just a one-off. We don't have any search for this card, so I think it's a little bit too random to be able to make that work. So I think you just accept that if your opponent's gusting up your Oricorio, yes, they're going ahead in a prize race, but they've left a Blacephalon with 3 energies on it, and that's a big deal for you. That's like better than getting 3 random cards from Oricorio more often than not. So I feel like prize racing is this deck's forte already. I don't feel like Island Challenge Amulet is absolutely mandatory. Lily's Pokédoll has been successful in previous Blacephalon lists, and this deck certainly can sit there and try and buy time, especially now that we have the Zacian V in the deck. You can try and just sit behind Dolls and Intrepid Sword to try and build up that hand a little bit more. It's something I've thought about weaving in, but instead I went for a higher stadium count. Perhaps you could cut the Stadium Nav if you're not a believer, or if you just want to go down to 2 Ultra Space and keep the Stadium Nav, you could try and squeeze in like 1 Pokédoll. Again, playing these sort of one-offs becomes a little bit random when you don't have much search. But it certainly can be a nice thing to buy yourself a free turn. Beast Energy can of course give you that extra 30 damage modifier. That can be good against a whole heap of things to put them in range, especially against like 270, 280 hit point tag teams and such. But it's not a basic energy. Again, it's not searchable. That's why I'm not going for it. And if you're skeptical of the 4 support account, perhaps a couple Rosa in the 60, as well as a couple Beast Rings could help ease those concerns. It can go ahead and grab you Pokemon as well, which is super tempting, especially when you have something like Phione in the 60. That can be a great option to find, or you can Rosa and grab that Oricorio and get yourself even more draw after the fact that you've gone ahead and grabbed like Beast Ring to attach to your Blacephalon. I think my biggest issue is the Rosa isn't just her own spaces, like the 2 spaces that she would take up. It's also that you'd have to squeeze in Beast Rings as well, and that can sometimes conflict with your early Fiery Flint synergy as well. It might leave you wanting to keep like 1 or 2 fires just in the deck to have that Beast Energy as Beast Ring as a live option. And I think usually just trying to thin the deck entirely of fires is going to be a better strategy overall. So I wouldn't hate Rosa again just to have a higher support account, because it is a little bit Monka-esque trying to play this deck, because missing Welder is just yikes, and you're just sort of twiddling your thumbs until then, really. Onto the matchup overview, I think the Malamar deck is still going to just be really strong against you. You have lots of easy Jirachis for them to ping down with their spell tags and such. Tina Chomp I also think could be awkward, especially if they play that Roxy sort of stuff. They can just try and take multiple prize knockouts. They can try and set up things like they can snipe Jirachis into the active, and then they can try and like Roxy around it, get it knocked out whilst also knocking out like a Blacephalon that's forced into the active. I feel like that can be awkward. And of course, they have the early option of just going like Miss Magius, Miss Magius, Miss Magius, stamp, and then you're like, oh yeah, my hand is really terrible. We have so many cards that we don't want to see in those opening turns that it really could get rough. We don't have enough Gust for Florgus Dolls, it would just be a loss. Pikarom I also think is a little bit awkward. I mainly said that Judge Pikarom's going to be a bit of a problem. We are playing Mew, but also we don't have great access to the Mew in the first place. So I think that Tag Bolt is still something that I'd be a little bit sketchy against, especially if they are a heavy Marnie-based build. Bird Control we don't really have many options for. Yes, we have Victini to try and reload Fire Energies, but they have easy trapping, and they can actually do the hand block against us. Quagnag I think is awkward. They can represent a lot of single prizes against us, and they have Magikarp Warlord that can be a nice sweep for them. Again, we do have Mew, but it's something they can try and pick off at any point. Morpeko Dolls, again, just like Florgus, we don't really have much gusting to try and deal with them very easily. And I also am super scared of Mewtwo trying to hand block you as well, because if they pull that off, you are going to be in a lot of trouble. You're going to be relying on just those, 2 or 3 cards that you have left in your hand, and maybe like a Stellar Wish if you're lucky, to try and get yourself in good shape. It's another reason why I have stuff like Intrepid Sword, just because you can have that on the board. It's not very easy for Mew to bring it up or knock it out. So if you are taken down to that low hand size, you can just try and make a nice reload with that Intrepid Sword. So I have tried to learn from the games I've had so far with this deck, and it may not be the list that you initially thought was going to be the 60 that I posted today, but based on this matchup spread, I'm trying to make it slightly better against the things that I'm concerned about, and just make it the best deck it can be, because as I was like super hyped going into this list, being like, man, Lucky Egg breaks this deck wide open, but then you realize that you still have like 30 or so cards that are really redundant in those opening turns, that you just want to try and make the list as safe as possible so you don't just get wrecked on those opening turns. Closing thoughts are that Lucky Egg is super incredible. That's certainly true. It can't be understated how powerful that card will be, but you do still need to get into the game, and that's why we're only playing 2 copies, so that's just something to bear in mind. Blacephalon's output, we all know it's insane. It's such a good selling point that I'm okay trying to play a list that has 30 redundant cards in those opening turns. That's just how it is, basically. I do think there are other options of trying to build Blacephalon. Obviously, we've seen the Greens build be successful in the past, and them gaining Lucky Eggs certainly sounds like a big deal. And there's also the Pidgeotto build. Potentially, you could even move towards a Mincino build going forward if you're a little bit sketched out by trying to have an Elm engine when you're not able to use it going first. So I think that's the main reason I wanted to profile this 60. It seemed like it's adapted from the new supporter rule changes, where you're relatively happy to go first as this list, compared to the other two where you feel even more worried about just getting early donks. Yes, the Pidgeotto build can have a similar number of basic Pokemon. Yes, its draw engine will become pretty safe in that sort of mid-game, but you're still really, really worried that the Pidgeottos might be way slower now that you can't Elm turn 1 going first, and your opponent's going to start pressurizing you really quickly. So I think that usually this is going to be the safest list in terms of defending against donks, which is a really big deal and something that I'm even scared of with this 60, to be honest. So yeah, let me know what your early experiences have been with this deck. Have you just been clunking out? Have you just been having some rough games with the list that we saw winning in Japan? Or is it just really float your boat? Do you think that Lucky Egg is just incredible? I will hear it all down below. Let me know what you think of the changes I've put into my 60, and we'll get involved in the discussion about how good this deck is going to be. A lot of people are hyping this, as, tier 1.5 contender, just because of its raw damage output, and it's not until you sit down and start playing the deck where you see the obvious flaws coming into play. But at the end of the day, Glass Cannon decks still have a place in the meta. They've been doing well recently in tournaments pre-Sword&Shield over in Europe, so there's certainly a chance that this will end up being a dominant force in the metagame. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I will see you in another video tomorrow.